entirely discovered and designed by artificial intelligence to begin a phase 2 clinical trial. Joining us now is former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He also serves on the board of FISA and Illumina and is a CNBC contributor. I don't know where we went over the tipping point for calling it this, Scott, because I can go back. I remember years ago the new guy at the MIT Center for Cancer Research, you might even know him, Tyler Jacks. The reason they picked him was because he was going to fuse a lot of computer technology with drug discovery. With combinatorial chemistry or rational drug design, use computers to see what compound's going to bind most tightly to the target. So we've been using computers for how many years? And when did we cross over the step where we call it artificial intelligence, when it's been incorporated for years and years and years? What's the difference now?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. We've been using these in silico tools probably since the early 2000s. There were companies that were formed in the early 2000s based on rational drug design using computers to help design the drugs and discover the new targets and the drugs that would hit those targets. It does appear that this company has made heavier use of those tools, but there's a lot of companies that are making very heavy use of those tools. So I'm not really sure if there's a tipping point when it comes to the discovery and the development of novel molecules to hit new targets and using computers for that purpose. I think where we're going to see a lot of innovation is continuing to incorporate these tools in early discovery and development and refining molecules, but also moving them closer to the patient, using some of these artificial intelligence tools, these large language models, to help stratify and select patients into clinical trials that are more likely to benefit from some of these drugs, less likely to experience side effects, and then ultimately having the regulatory constructs to move those into the care setting, to move them into healthcare, and guide how we deliver drugs to patients in the healthcare setting. That's going to be, I think, the real tipping point to allowing these tools to really start to make substantial improvements in the delivery of healthcare.
I can imagine that the convergence of like 3D imaging for different compounds, you know, where you see the active site of an enzyme or something, you could use AI to design something that's not even naturally occurring.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's how these in silico tools are being used. And also, we've done a good job of drugging diseases caused by single genes or single proteins or single enzymatic pathways. With some of these large language models, what you're going to be able to do is look across multiple genetic and proteomic changes and find molecules that can intervene on them simultaneously if a disease is being caused by multiple modalities. Also, there's going to be multimodal models coming out later this year that could look across not just genomic and proteomic data and phenotypic data on how patients are behaving, how they're responding to drugs, their symptoms, but also imaging data. And once you have those large language models that can look across multiple different forms of data, you're going to start to make correlations that are just too hard to do from traditional discovery vehicles.
Yeah, you think about what big data tells us about, mundane, well, not mundane, but marketing or consumer habits, and think of what you could do with big data on drug-drug interactions and outcome and all kinds of, what prognoses are, survival rates, all the things that you could use the big data for using AI just to design the best drug you could possibly use for someone with the best outcome. I mean, it's kind of daunting. I'm glad there's people that are doing this, but it seems like it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of computer power.
Right, and the key is also the quality of the data, making sure there's adequate transparency around the data sets that are being used to train these models, and also the quality of the data that's going in. We do have AI tools that are used in healthcare right now, for example, tools that are used to help augment diagnoses of radiology scans and imaging, also pathology. But those were trained on locked data sets where we knew the integrity of the data and the reliability of the data. So, for example, you might train an AI tool that's used in imaging on known MRI scans where you had radiologists reading those scans and verifying that a tumor was, in fact, a tumor. It becomes more complex when you start to train these models on the totality of data that might be in an electronic health record, for example. And you're going to have to find ways to ensure the integrity of that data, the quality of the data, and you also want transparency around it. So if the data, for example, in a EHR, in an electronic health record, is saying that a patient was ventilated, what does that mean? You want consistent terminology across different medical records. There's tools for doing that, and I think that's going to be the key, getting those tools incorporated. And that's also going to be the key to regulation by the FDA. The FDA is going to want ways to ensure the quality of the data, and that's going to be the nexus for how they regulate these tools that are ultimately used to guide patient care.
I mean, it's mind-boggling. AI could be, in healthcare, could be the biggest usage. You could present data to the HMS or to Medicare and Medicaid and say, look, this is why you need to pay for this. Or conversely, you could say, look, we're not getting any benefit from all this money, and there's no reason to even do it at this point. I can think of so many different uses for when you could aggregate a lot of different data. I wonder if doctors, I think this is once again where it would be helpful, not necessarily displacing doctors. But medicine is an art, as you know, and an experienced clinician, right? An experienced clinician can be presented with a lot of stuff and just take a guess on what's really happening. With AI, would you be able to, it would not be an art, it would be a pure science medicine at that point. You might not need the intuition of a great doctor.
Well, look, I think it's certainly going to be the most impactful application in healthcare, not just drug discovery, but also the delivery of healthcare. You raised an interesting point in your comments about the use of these tools by insurers. This is creating a lot of consternation on Capitol Hill right now.
Yeah, machines say you can't have this. Yeah, machines say you can't have this drug. You got to die. That's scary.
And a lot of legislators are calling for new regulation. I think that would be a mistake to try to create new regulatory models. The existing regulatory models can adequately deal with these. We do have regulation of health plans in terms of how they deal with claims and claim denials, and you can apply those rules to the use of these tools. And so my concern is that these healthcare applications could get scoped into some of these calls for regulation more broadly of AI. And what we need to recognize is that when it comes to healthcare, there's a lot of existing regulatory frameworks that have been put in place over a long period of time that are adequate to deal with these tools and the incorporation of these tools, not just into drug development and drug delivery, but also health plans. The FDA is certainly equipped to regulate these tools. I think some of those rules need to be modernized, but they certainly have the authorities to do it. And the same with CMS and other state health insurance regulators. I don't think you need new legislation, new rules. I think the existing rules can be adapted to deal adequately with these.
All right, now I might write some science fiction. You'd have computer death panels. And
well, that's exactly what they're saying.
I know, and that's the way it would start. And sooner or later, they won't give you any medicine when they decide that they don't want any humans anyway. See, that's what we got to think about.
Computer death models to figure out whether
death panels.
Computer
death panels. No,
to figure out what people should or shouldn't get.
That say you don't get this because it's too expensive.
This is too expensive of a medication.
Yeah. And then, like I said, they'll take it to the next step where we don't want you living anyway because we're computers.
Yeah, but look, we have regulation on how health plans have to deal with denials of claims, and so you don't need a new set of legislation to deal with this. And that's what's happening on Capitol Hill right now. This is quietly happening right now. There are people calling for new legislation to impose new restrictions on the use of these tools within health plans. But I think we have adequate authorities within the existing agencies, and you don't want to stymie the introduction. These can be very helpful at also facilitating access to treatments, making sure the right treatment gets to the right patient at the right time, as long as they're used appropriately and the models themselves are reliable and well validated. And that's the key.
That's the big but.
I'm telling you. Eventually we'll be in a Terminator world. We will. I see it coming, Scott. Thank you. We got to think about it now before it's too late. Squawk Box will be right back.